Coming up on The Breakdown, the Republicans won't budge on the January 6th commission. But our guest, author and democracy expert David Faris, says a coup can come in many different forms. We'll look at the creeping coup around the voter suppression taking place in Texas, and we'll remember the Tulsa massacre 100 years later. We'll take your questions from Twitter, use hashtag #AskTheBreakdown, and it all starts now. Good evening and welcome to The Breakdown. I'm Tara Setmayer, and with me as always, my illustrious co-host, the Rick Wilson. Rick, good evening.
My earpiece flopped out of my jacket. I'm so embarrassed. I feel like such
Your
a rookie.
earpiece is over it, right? It's been a day, it's been busy.
My earpiece is like, it's Tuesday, God damn it. The Monday of Tuesdays.
Right. Since we just had a long weekend, I hope at least you had a restful and meaningful Memorial Day weekend. I know I did. It was rainy though and cold here. You're down in Florida where it's warm, but it was kind of nasty.
It was ridiculously perfect. It was ridiculously perfect here the entire weekend. I mean, like
because of
Chamber of Commerce weather, like, am I dead living in a simulation because this weather is too nice? It was astounding.
Oh, to hell with you and you Florida people and your nice weather, but you have a shitty governor. So before we get started,
he's only marginally insane.
Well, marginally, right? Oh my gosh. Well, we want to remind folks before we get started tonight to tweet at us because we like to hear from you and answer your questions. So send us your tweets to hashtag #AskTheBreakdown and we will get to them later in the show. All right, Rick, it's time to break down some headlines. There's been a lot going on.
Let's do it.
I feel like I say this every show, but there's a little stuff going on here. We wanted to kind of stay with the theme of the January 6th insurrection, because over the weekend we saw on the Sunday shows Republicans out there trying to justify their continued obstinance over supporting this commission. I saw Michael McCall on CNN on Sunday trying to make the excuse that he used to be the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee. I've spent many a late nights with Michael McCall, my old boss on the Hill, back when I worked on the Hill. He knows better. He's one of those guys that knows better.
Sure.
That's trying to keep his head down so he can get reelected. But he went up there and tried to say, well, we don't want to have duplicative investigations. There's criminal investigations already going on. We don't need a commission and blah, 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 blah. That's the BS line that they're trying to pull. But, as those Republicans continue to refuse this investigation, right, it makes us think about kind of what the real meaning of a coup is. Because there's a theme today, folks, and it's coup, which we never thought that we would be talking about in America as actually like on American soil. Coups happen like elsewhere, right? Well, no, there's a theme today, so stick with us. You'll see where we're going with this. Some of the coups that we think of juntas and coups, we think of things that kind of look like this. Right? I mean, that kind of looks like a coup. Maybe there weren't tanks, but it was pretty violent. People trying to take over the seat of government, interrupt our democratic process violently, right? But coups can take many forms, right? And it may not be tanks, it may not be guns, but there's other kinds of coups. And what happened in Texas over the weekend? Probably like many Americans, I was not watching the news. I decided that I needed to decompress a little bit this weekend. But of course, the Twitter machine went off but with these breaking news alerts about this vote going on in Texas and how Republicans in the Texas legislature actually attempted to move forward with these like really significant voter suppression bills. One bill, different measures. And the Democrats were like, no, we're not going to let this happen. There were all of these hijinks over the weekend, this political high drama where Democrats said, because they don't control the chamber, the Republicans do, but Democrats said, okay, we have to figure out a way to stop this. So what did they do? They walked off. So they couldn't have a quorum to vote on it. They said, we're out of here. We're not going to let you guys get away with this, because it was the last day of the session, the legislative session.
Right. And I have to say, Tara, Democrats are often bad at politics in a sort of holistic sense. They often blow opportunities. They often fail to appreciate the power of being in the minority. They often fail to have a grasp of the strategic import of a big, splashy, symbolic gesture. Well, their walkout was a rare moment where Democrats were able to come into a political space and do something that was effective, that shocked people, that got attention. And this is something that I think is a lesson for the Senate Democrats in Washington, who never fail to let Mitch McConnell prank them, who never fail to let Mitch McConnell pull their pants down and slap their ass, because they still think that they're dealing with people who are rational counteractors in a process, or who have a philosophical disagreement with them. What you're
Right.
seeing now are people who are fundamentally not rational counterparties in these negotiations. You are seeing people who are trying to push through things because they are trying to sustain the big lie that Trump was the legitimately elected president. They're trying to build this complex scaffolding and this complex justification around why and how Trump got his ass kicked, and to prevent it from happening in the future by picking their voters. I mean, there was one provision in this bill that essentially wildly expanded the Texas power of a judge in Texas to say, no, I don't care about the results or the details. It was close enough that that fraud could have made the difference, so the judge could disqualify the election without an evidentiary background on it, which blew me away. But it's also very much apropos to the current moment of the Republican Party, where they're trying to pick their voters, and they know that they can't win if they don't cheat.
That's right. And what this is doing is it is a methodical dismantling of democracy, because they're chipping away
Yeah.
at these fundamental institutional rights that are guaranteed to folks, particularly around voting. And even though they may not say that, oh, it's racially motivated, or, it's not that blatant, but when you put restrictions on Sunday voting, because we all know that that is a way to try to dissuade souls to the polls, which is
Right.
an effort to get folks in Black churches on Sundays out to vote with early voter registration. They're trying to restrict that. They're trying to restrict whether you can, how soon you can vote, early voting, the different types of IDs you need, the drop boxes, all of these things, like what we saw in Harris County, where you had one drop box for like a county of 5 million people. They're trying to
Right.
continually make it more difficult to vote, because they know that if
That's
people
right.
go out, the more people who vote, the less likely they are to win. This is all a power grab, and it undermines our institutions. And this idiot, the freaking Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, who's up for re-election, um, he devoted 22,000 staff hours to trying to identify voter fraud in the last election. And guess what he came up with, Rick? A whole 16
16
people.
cases.
Right, 16 people with
Right. Who
incorrect
didn't have the right
addresses on their
address
forms.
in there.
Get the hell
Yeah.
out of here. Like 22,000 staff hours. That's a lot of taxpayer money to find nothing. They're trying to find problems to match their solutions. And this is, happening not only in Texas, but it's happening across the country, where these states have these Republican legislatures. This is another attempt to try to control the results of election and who's in power. And Greg Abbott, the governor, who's no better, he went out there to threaten to stop funding for the legislatures. He said he would cut their pay, and also the pay of the support staff of the people who work for the legislators, if they don't, come back in session
Sure.
and go along with this. You know who
Look,
that hurts? That hurts the little guy, the people who they claim they're supposed to
right.
support. For what? They're throwing
And
a temper tantrum.
it's crude political blackmail is what
That's
is
right.
extortion, really. It's crude political extortion. And look, Greg Abbott was once upon a time one of these guys who was a middle of the road, center right-ish Republican. He wasn't a crazy person. In fact, there were a lot of Republicans who thought he was too far to the left. And now he has gone full Trump. Why is Ken Paxton doing 22,000 man hours of investigations on the imaginary, unicorn of voter fraud? Because he's running in a primary now with George P. Bush, and they're in a race to see who can strap on the golden knee pads and kiss Trump's ass hardest. I mean, these are people who are no longer driven by factors that used to drive Republicans, philosophical orientation or a political agenda. It is all about the retention of power, repetition of the big lie that Donald Trump must have to keep himself, relevant in his own head, and to pretend he's going to be president again in the next 5 minutes.
Which leads me to our next headline tonight to break down, which is this idea that somehow a coup, a Myanmar style coup, okay, which was a
Myanmar.
violent
He
military.
called it Myanmar or something like that.
Did he? I'm not surprised. For those who don't know, it was Burma, borders Thailand. They had, they've had a lot of problems over there, and they had a violent coup that killed lots of people
Yep.
this year. And no one in the Western democratic world was like, "Yeah, that's great. We're glad that happened." Like, no. But guess who
Right.
did say something to the effect that when he was asked about this Myanmar coup, and asked about whether it could happen here in America at a QAnon kook conference over the weekend in Dallas. Let's take a listen.
I'm a simple Marine. I want to know why what happened in Myanmar can't happen here. No reason. I mean, it should happen here. No reason. That's right.
No reason it should happen here.
Right.
So first off, people should understand, Myanmar was for a very, very long time, generations, basically a military dictatorship. Aung San Suu Kyi, who had been in prison for decades, came out, became prime minister, and look, she was imperfect by a lot of measures, but the military coup that replaced her is now apparently what's in the middle of the Trump world, QAnon world's political spank bank, and they are fantasizing, as Mike Flynn said. He didn't just say, it could. He said it should.
Right.
So,
It should.
and I'm no lawyer, and I'm certainly no JAG, but it seems to me that somebody ought to recall Michael Flynn to active duty and fucking court-martial him. That is an outright call for sedition. I know there were people that will vary in their opinion on that, but this is part of a pattern of his behavior over time that I think is unbelievably dangerous to this country.
Absolutely. And besides that, besides the fact that the guy who asked the question probably couldn't find Myanmar on a map and didn't even pronounce it correctly, what is their obsession with this? The obsession with this violent takeover of our government all stems back to the big lie, and to even back to when Trump was talking about that. We won't accept the election, and whatever happens type stuff. The dog whistle to the Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. We found out in court filings today that some Oath Keepers literally were armed and ready to go the day of the insurrection on January 6th. There was a rapid response team mustering outside of.
They had a quick reaction force ready to head into DC, armed to the teeth.
That's right.
Terry, you were pointing out earlier that not every coup looks like the old-fashioned, image of coups from the '60s, where they take over the airfield and the radio station and seize the Palace of Justice.
Mm-hmm.
These things now are technical matters. They are now social media driven. They are now inspired by not only like radicals out in the hills, but by the former president of the United States of America. At the time, he was still the president of the United States of America. They are also they're also organized and right now. The Stop the Steal idiots, Roger Stone and Oleg Alexander and Alex Jones and all this other, vomit pool of insurrectionists and seditionists that are out there and who have yet to be prosecuted. And we talked about this in the last show, and I want to repeat this for our audience because it's important.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't punish the people who try to conduct a coup, you will get more. They look at it at that point as a training exercise that didn't happen right, rather than a moment where they tried, failed, and are now in fear of their lives and their freedoms.
And they're waiting to be activated.
Right. These people should fear for their lives and their freedoms. Okay. Guys who plan the Stop the Steal rally, Amy Kremer and Roger Stone and Ollie Alexander, all these guys, they should be in jail waiting trial.
That's true.
The people that were up on that podium that day calling for people to go trial by combat, Rudy and Don Jr. and the rest of that idiot crew, I understand that prosecutors are going to hesitate to bring them into the picture. I get it. They think that just lining up these idiots that were out there is enough. I disagree with that philosophy. I think you
Sure,
have
me too.
to cause pain at the leadership level of the coup, or you'll get another coup.
And that's why the Republicans do not want the January 6th commission. Because even though
Correct.
not everything that's wrong is necessarily criminal, and the types of investigations that they're the criminal investigations and the level of evidence they need to prosecute is not necessarily always what we need to make sure this never happens again. That's why the 9/11 Commission was formed. That's why we found out the intelligence failures. We found out who knew what and when and who didn't move. We found out about the wall of separation between the intelligence community and law enforcement. Like, that's what a commission found out. A criminal investigation will not find those things out. And the Republicans are scared to death that not only they don't want this to carry over into an election year and seeing this constantly over and over again, people being reminded of their party and their people, that what they did and what Republicans didn't condemn. But they also don't want their own exposed. They don't want to face the fact that Donald Trump was behind it, pushed it, sat back and didn't do anything about it, and all of the failures that happened as a result. They don't want to face it.
Right.
And meanwhile, you've got these dumbasses out here like Sidney Powell, Linwood, and the pillow guy feeding this propaganda lie bullshit to people that Trump is still going to be president, that he's going to be replaced. Like the My Pillow guy is the one that thinks, you and I were talking about this before the show, Rick. You said that Trump was out there, this Maggie Haberman story, that Trump was out there saying he's going to be installed by the Supreme Court in August, right? He's telling people this. He's getting that from the fucking My Pillow guy. My Pillow guy is telling the blogger in retirement in Florida that he's going to be reinstalled by the Supreme Court, which is not even in session in August, by the way. They don't come back until I think October. That he's going to be reinstated by them. And he's literally saying this out loud. This is who these people are worshiping? I can't. It's absurd.
But you know, here's the thing. They're so post-fact and so post-truth that they don't care about, how it looks on the outside. They care about, does it keep the email fundraising churn going? Does it keep Trump in the headlines?
About this.
Are they gonna have him, are they gonna have him maintain the power he has over the party by being present in the party's life? And they are.
Well, yes, and they continue to do this. They continue to raise money. That kook conference over the weekend, the QAnon kook conference in Dallas, was like $500 a ticket. This wasn't cheap.
Yeah,
these people are, they're cashing out their Social Security checks to go and, see these idiots. But, this is, Michael Flynn was a former national security advisor. No wonder he was under investigation. No wonder that, Obama was like, don't hire Michael Flynn. I mean, this guy is, you're right, should be court-martialed. He should have been in jail, frankly. He's a disgrace to his uniform. He's a disgrace to the service here.
Sure.
And that's just, just one of the things I want to say about him. But just remember for people to know that we are watching. Abe is watching what's going on out there. And we're making sure that people do not forget the importance of why. We might laugh and make fun of these kooks, but there's a lot of them out there. And if we don't pay attention to what they're doing, they can get away with it and fly under the radar. There is a QAnon poll out here that shows that a really large percent of the Republican Party believes in the crazy QAnon conspiracy theories, one of them being that the storm is coming and that it's going to sweep through the government and like take over the government. There is a coup violent element to what QAnon believes. So that's why we continue to bring this up, because unfortunately there's a lot of people out there that actually believe this shit. So on that note, we're going to take a quick break, and coming up, we'll talk to David Faris, the Associate Professor of Politics at Roosevelt University, about some of this stuff and what Democrats need to do to try to combat this, because we've been warning, we want them to listen to us. So we're bringing somebody else on to talk about it as well. So stay tuned for him. But first, we'll take a quick break.
The men who followed this flag 150 years ago knew what it meant. Treason against their country. The death of the United States. America defeated the men who followed that flag. Those with honor surrendered and cast it aside forever. So why does it keep showing up today at events supporting Donald Trump? And why does he call the folks who carry it very fine people?
I think there's blame on both sides, but you also had people that were very fine people.
What does it say that they're all in for Trump? What does it say that he won't condemn a flag of hate, division, and losers?
Will not replace us!
For us, it says this is a time for choosing America or Trump.
Paid for by the Lincoln Project, which is responsible for the content of this advertising.
And welcome back to The Breakdown. So between the craziness of January 6th and the attack on voting rights in Texas, we're discussing the status of Republican coups, I guess we can call them, in the United States. It reminds me of the conversation, Rick, that my former colleague at CNN, Carl Bernstein, he used to say during the election that what was happening, this percolation of potential violence, was a cold civil war. And I took that phrase and said, I feared that cold civil war would turn hot. And I think that's what we saw on January 6th, obviously. But this conversation about, coups aren't always violent. There's other ways that, things can be undermined and institutions can be broken down that achieve a similar goal. I think we should bring in our guest. So tonight, to break it all down, we have David Faris. He is the Associate Professor of Political Science at Roosevelt University. He is also author of It's Time to Fight Dirty: How Democrats Can Build a Lasting Majority in American Politics. David, thank you for being here with us. Rick Wilson wanted you on the show just because you had almost as cool of a book title as Everything Trump Touches Dies. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I wish we had happier things to talk about, but it is what it is, right? So,
indeed, my gosh, we say that a lot with our guests because it's been so heavy over the last 4 years. And once we saw that, okay, Trump's losing, he's going to go, that's the end of him. No, this Trumpism is still hanging around. The Republican Party has not off-ramped from the crazy, and Trump is still blogging from, Mar-a-Lago, now I think from Jersey, where he's in Bedminster. But the sentiment behind what fueled the Trump movement is still out there alive and well. And today is the 1-year anniversary of the Lafayette Square fiasco, which brought me to tears last year when I saw our own law enforcement officers and military clearing out peaceful protesters. So this bastard could go over here and have a photo op with an upside down Bible in front of a church he would never step foot in, and all of his enablers over here. That was a day, I think, that was another day of infamy in this country, that I don't think enough Americans really appreciate what that did, what that said, especially about Donald Trump. I don't know. It just felt like democracy was 1 foot almost in the grave that day.
Yeah, I mean, American democracy is not healthy right now. And the Lafayette Square photo op where they forcibly cleared out protesters so he could, incompetently pretend to be religious was just one symptom of a larger disease here, which is that the Republican Party is having some sort of shared hallucination. And the shared hallucination is about election fraud, election integrity, right? Like big city Democrats are sort of magically producing hundreds of thousands of votes that weren't there. President Trump and former President Trump in a year ago was already sort of telegraphing this plot. He was telling us what he was going to do. He said, I'm not going to respect the election results. There was already these rumors about how they were going to lean on Republican state legislatures to send alternate slates of electors to DC to be counted. And when this stuff first started bubbling out, I thought, well, they can't do this, and indeed they couldn't, right? But like what they're doing right now is they are laying the groundwork for a better version of their 2020 big lie election theft plot. They're putting it into motion for next year. They're putting it into motion for 2024. They want to empower red state legislatures and red state secretaries of state and red state governors to overturn election results, to fire local election officials, just sort of all sorts of malevolent stuff coming at us, all because the former president of the United States, has sort of hoodwinked his entire cult into believing this dreadful lie. I think American democracy was already in trouble. That's why I wrote the book in 2018. But he made it so much worse. And we're in so much more danger than we were even a few years ago, that I just can't bring myself to do anything but run around kind of sounding the alarm,
We feel you, because that's what we do every day, trying to remind people, right? I mean, you tweeted only a couple weeks ago, you said, I'm not sure people appreciate how much danger we are in. And that was just a couple weeks ago. What was the impetus for that tweet that day?
I think, just all of the bills making their way through Republican state legislatures right now is one thing. The other thing is the inaction of Democrats in Congress. And that is, that the House passed H.R. 1, the For the People Act. It's not a perfect bill. There's some things in there that we can all disagree about, right? But fundamentally, that bill is meant to shore up American democracy against the various assaults that are coming at it. It is meant to prevent Republicans from drawing gerrymandered maps where they pick their own voters, and entrench their power for a decade or longer, as they have done in Wisconsin, North Carolina, Michigan, Pennsylvania. None of these states, which are, in comparative perspective, these are not democracies anymore, right? These are places where there are facade elections for the state legislature. The party with more votes cannot actually take power. And that means that the people themselves don't have control of the public agenda. That's like a basic sort of definition of democracy. Right. And so what we're seeing right now is the Wisconsinification of American politics. They want to do what they did in Wisconsin. They want to do it to all of us. And it's a plot that's unfolding in real time. It's dispiriting that a couple of Democrats, 2 or 3 at the most, are holding all of this stuff up in Congress, in the Senate. And so it's that combination of, you've got these terrible laws that are much worse than the voter suppression laws that are already on the books. Going to make it harder for Democrats to win elections. And then on the other side, you have Democrats. I think most of them get it, right? But there's a handful of Democrats in the Senate who don't get it at all. Who are holding on to this fantasy of bipartisanship, that you can get 10 Republican votes for anything, 10 Republican votes to say we are still a democracy. I don't think they could do that. I don't think they could get that on a piece of paper. And so the tweet was coming from a place of frustration and fear. I'm not an alarmist by nature. I don't want to live through any of this stuff. I don't want my son to live through any of this stuff, right? Like, I want to live in a functional democracy. If we lose elections, we lose elections. We lose them fair and square. But that's not what's happening right now, and that's what's so terrifying to me, honestly.
Right, David. I think that's a really good point. Is that look, they increasingly resemble the Ba'ath Party in Iraq, where there were elections and Saddam got 105% of the vote. And everyone who was in the right family tree got elected to their seats with 105% of the vote, and it looked like a democracy on some vague kind of squint and close your eyes and have a couple cocktails first way, but it wasn't in any way a democracy. And what they're asking to do now, it seems to me, it's like they're not trying to make this as blunt as I joke about, seize the airfield, the radio station. They just want to break down all the normative systems and legal protections for people to vote so they can pick their voters and pick their election results as they choose. Which I think you agree that's an incredibly slippery and dangerous slope for us to get on as a country.
Yeah, it's very dangerous, right? Once you have undermined the public's confidence in any elections that a Democrat might win, right, it empowers you, presuming you have a trifecta at the state level, to put into place all kinds of laws that make it harder for Democrats to win, if not impossible for Democrats to win. And the beauty of, the dark beauty of this kind of facade democracy, what we call competitive authoritarianism in political science, is that it gives enough people in the system, enough people who are voting, confidence that they are taking part in a legitimate system to sort of ward off the mass discontent and the mass unrest that might lead to some kind of regime change. And so, yeah, it's not going to look like Iraq. It's not going to be tanks in the street. Trump's not going to ride down Pennsylvania Avenue in a hat and be reinstalled by the Supreme Court, whatever. Just unbelievable, these people. But what it will look like is a country where you can't change the leadership. That you can win more votes in all kinds of different places, but ultimately you won't win those elections. And that is a system that will turn a lot of people off from participating in politics because they aren't going to believe that it's real. The people that are participating in politics will be bought off or co-opted in some way. And the scariest part about this, I think, when people think about a coup, they think of the big dramatic event, right? They think they're going to wake up the next day and be like, time to charge into the streets, right? Like, we got to save our country. But this kind of competitive authoritarianism is not going to work like that. If they steal the 2024 election, or if they win the 2024 election on their own terms, on a gerrymandered House, a malapportioned Senate, electoral college misfire, right? Which is also a form of competitive authoritarianism. People are going to wake up the next day and they're going to go to work. Yeah, they're going to take care of the kids. They're not going to take to the streets in a subtle democratic backsliding as that. And that they know that. That's what they want. They fear the electorate. Sure. They fear a free and fair election. And this is how they want to do it. And we have to stop them. We just have to stop them.
Indeed.
It is the urgent mission of our time, David. And I really appreciate that perspective on it, because it's when we set out to defeat Trump in 2020, it wasn't just because we disliked the orange man. It was because he represented something that was so contrary to the democratic underpinnings of this republic that
So Rick is breaking up a little bit, but I can finish his thought for him. Yes, because when it was about a year ago at this time, when the Lincoln Project really began to take off and really was focused on the defeat of Trump and realized the urgency of the moment, particularly after the day like today, a year ago, the Lafayette Square incident, where we saw not just competitive authoritarianism, but we saw what an authoritarian president could look like in the United States of America. It was literally brother on brother, which is what brought me to tears that day, watching that unfold. I could not believe what I was seeing, and imagine what another 4 years of that would have looked like. I mean, our democracy was literally on life support. It was life or death for our democracy in November. And we did everything we could in Lincoln Project to try to make sure people understood that. And it's clear that 80 million Americans, in fact, did. But 75 million Americans still voted for that, which is why we have more to talk about. So we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with David Faris in a moment.
America is starting to breathe again. A decent man as president, a plan to protect us. It feels almost normal, but it's not. Republicans still will not admit that President Biden was legally elected, which means they don't believe in democracy. They believe an election is only legitimate if they win. That's not democracy.
We're all at the mercy of the internet.
Their plan? Pass voter suppression bills to block minorities from voting, take back Congress, impeach President Biden. We refuse. We refuse to accept the end of the American experiment. We refuse to allow anti-democratic autocrats to steal our country. We choose to fight, and we will not lose. Join us.
So what led you to paint this portrait of Lincoln? Can you tell us the story behind that?
Sure.
In our house, we have
a year ago,
the internet's in the basement, and we have an extender network upstairs. And so whenever I come down,
apart, the election
it automatically walks extender network. And every time I taught a class this semester,
I felt like,
excuse me, I have to get on the right
network. I needed to have a response. I said to myself, what is my response as an artist? I teach art to veterans at Fordham University.
Thanks for having me. This is fun. I appreciate it.
And I think about art a lot and the purpose of art and and the job of an artist. And I thought to myself, okay,
hopefully
so what
this
is
all not in vain.
What is my response to all this insanity that's going on around us? Mm-hmm. And I immediately, without even thinking, I immediately thought of Abraham Lincoln. I think that we see this man as
got a toddler upstairs,
probably the best of us for all the right reasons.
Yeah, I'm surprised my cat has not made an appearance yet, but it's going on. When I'm teaching, I make if a pet comes onto the screen, come on. Tell us who this is.
And welcome back to the breakdown. So we've been discussing competitive authoritarianism, taking me back to my GW Political Science 101 classes. But this is stuff that we never thought we would see or be talking about in the United States, and yet here we are. We want to bring back our guest tonight, David Faris. He's the Associate Professor of Political Science at Roosevelt University. David, do we have David back? There he is. David, we before we went to break, we were talking about the intensity and seriousness of the health of our democracy, what we saw, the danger that Trump and Trumpism represents to it. But I wanted to get your opinion on what happened in Texas and a little bit about Democrats kind of stepping it up a little bit more. Like, was this an example in Texas where Democrats actually grew a pair and did something to stop the Republicans? Should they be doing more of this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, what happened in Texas was a shocking attempt to rewrite electoral law to reinforce Republican power. And you knew it was going to eventually make it through the state legislature. You knew the courts would uphold it in Texas because they're dominated by Republicans. Got a Republican governor, right? This is what I'm talking about, competitive authoritarianism. The irony is they actually don't really need to do it yet in Texas, but they did it anyway, right? Because they fear the Texas electorate. It's getting to be more of a purple state, and they wanted to identify all the ways that Democrats were able to vote in 2020 and outlaw them. So no drive-through voting, to kill the drop boxes, right? It was a methodical list of ways that people suffering through this pandemic were able to cast their ballot. And to say, screw you, right? I'm sorry that you voted, but you're never going to vote again. And Democrats took an unprecedented step of just, leaving the legislature and shutting it down. And they managed to kick it to the next session. And nobody thinks that that's going to, look, Greg Abbott's going to get his bill eventually, right? And Democrats are going to have to fight it in court. But what I appreciate is the fighting spirit, where they don't take it lying down, where they say, okay, you're going to use every procedural weapon that you have in your arsenal. Well, we're going to do that too. And it just so happens that they don't have the numbers in Texas to ultimately stop this bill from becoming law. What they do have is the narrative. What they do have is the media attention, the possibility of organizing boycotts and stuff like that. And that is all stemming from actions that the Texas Democrats took to use everything that they had to stop this bill. And I think the Democrats in Congress could really take a page out of that book and say, okay, what is within our constitutional authority to do here to make sure that Republicans don't stage either a soft coup or an actual coup after 2024? What do we need to do to stop that from happening? And I want them to take the spirit, if not the distinct legislative minorities from the Texas Democrats and try to take that national.
Rick? Did we get him? Rick, are you there? All right. So I will ask you a question about your new book, because I think that what we're talking about how Democrats need to kind of step it up and be a little bit more aggressive.
It really is. It really is a great example of a strategic moment that they made headlines. They committed news.
Yes, we only heard the last 5 seconds of your comments, Rick. But yes, we got the gist of it. And I was saying David
who knows?
Yeah, it's all right. I got your back. I was saying to David that this is kind of, doing something to light a fire under the ass of Democrats, because we've been warning over and over again that you guys have got to fight fire with fire. That was part of why the Lincoln Project was successful and why so many of our Democratic friends were like, thank you, because we know how to fight fire with fire, because we were lighting the fires for a long time with the Republicans. So we know the strategy. But you have a new book that came out last year called The Kids Are Left, How Young Voters Will Unite America. And in that book, you talk about how the younger generation favors the left, and it's a trend that we don't really see going away. And of course, obviously, I have some issues as a right of center person with some of the policies that the younger folks like, but I wish we could have those discussions and not talk about the health of our democracy. But the point that you make is that Republicans recognize that the younger generation, their voters are dying off, and the younger generation is, more to the left on policy. So they're not interested in fighting a policy war anymore. It's all about culture and ginning up the people who are still around to try to get them, to outvote the younger folks, because they don't necessarily come out and vote. They might protest, but they don't necessarily vote. We saw that trend start to change a little bit in the 2020 election. But speak a little bit about the role that the younger generation will play in this political gridlock that we're seeing now.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody in your audience is going to be surprised by the idea that young folks today tilt left. They tend to vote Democratic, right? The point of the book is that actually this has been going on for like almost 20 years. That is starting in 2002 and then accelerating after 2004. Under 30 voters started tilting Democratic by double digits more than the rest of the electorate. And I think that there's a widespread assumption out there, sort of like folk mythology, that people become more conservative as they get older. I'm sure you all know someone in your life who was a lefty as a young person and is now a rock solid conservative. And the point of the book is that it's actually not like really what happens. There's not a ton of social science evidence that people get more conservative as they age. In fact, your politics are pretty much set by age 25. And so the Republican Party is sort of stumbling into this long-term apocalypse because they have been losing under 30s for 18 years. And some of that initial cohort, that's me, right? Like 2002, 2004, those folks are in their 40s now, and they're still voting Democratic. And so you now have this, like, I don't know exactly what it is, 25 year long generation of Democratic supporting voters who just are not hearing what Republicans are saying. That is, the policy agenda is not aligned with what young people want. The culture war stuff is not resonating with them. And so I'm very confident that in the medium to long term, Democrats will be in a much stronger position than they are today. It's more like we have to survive the next 4 to 6 years of our history with a democracy intact, so that the young people can sort of inherit the power that is due to them as the millennial generation gets older, as Generation Z sort of ages into political power. And I think Republicans know this, or at least the ones that are not completely delusional and can read and write. So I'm excluding Tommy Tuberville and half the Senate caucus. The Republican strategists, they know this, right? Like, they can read exit polls, and they know that this has been going on for a long time, and they're terrified of it. It's just one more reason that they want to mess with the underpinnings of democracy, because they don't have any confidence that they can win free and fair national elections moving forward. And so it's heartening for those of us on the left. It's heartening to see the young folks sort of tilting in this direction. And I would just say to my Republican counterparts, the message of small government, low taxes, family values, that stuff still has resonance, right? It's the other things that the contemporary Republicans have tacked on to their policy agenda, the overt racism, white nationalism, the total denial of climate change. Yep. This is the stuff that's turning off the young voters. And they really, if they want to save themselves in the long term and they don't want to have a coup, they have to start winning incoming 18-year-olds, or they're going to get crushed. Starting in about 2028, they're going to get wiped out.
Well, David, thank you so much for being with us tonight. It was an absolutely fantastic conversation. I'm sorry for the technical bubbles on my end, but
that's all right. No
We've all been
worries.
there.
It's still an experiment, folks. We're doing our best.
Nah, not really. David, thank you for joining us, and thank you for ending it on the theme of the show and tying it in nicely in a bow about the coup. That's why you're a smart guy and a professor. We'll love to have you back. So
Talk to you
we'll
again
hope
soon,
to have you
David.
back
Thanks.
soon.
Yeah. All right. Take care.
All righty. So I think it's time for us to take some tweets, Mr. Wilson.
Oh, tweets. The magical
Yes,
Twitter machine.
tweets. Let's see what we've got from our audience because we like to hear from them. All right, first tweet from Gloria Morisaki. Why aren't Flynn and Sidney Powell facing charges for sedition?
Gloria, it's only Tuesday.
I know. Just, maybe because the Justice Department is a little busy right now prosecuting 400 other people who actually were like physically involved in the Sedition and Insurrection Act on January 6th. It's a little harder to prosecute sedition with words like that. You get into First Amendment issues and things. It's a little tougher, but calling for a coup is textbook sedition. So. But that's really why.
Neither one of them is ever going to spend a quiet day. I don't think from here forward. They've made their beds as leaders of an attempted coup against our democracy, and so it's never going to get easier for those idiots.
And we'll make sure it doesn't either. All right, what's the next one? Okay, dear Rick and Tara, Tom Nichols states that a massive Dem turnout in 2022 is enough to overcome voter suppression and gerrymandering tactics by the GOP. Do you agree with this assessment? And what sort of electoral reforms are required to fix democracy going forward? Rick, I'm going to pass that over to you. First, I'm going to say Tom Nichols, good friend. We love him. He was an advisor for us during the election. Smart guy. And he wrote an amazing book called The Death of Expertise, which was prescient, dealing with what we're dealing with now with people refusing.
Get it on Amazon.com where all fine books are sold.
Yes, you'll understand a lot about what's going on and how to handle these people that don't deal with facts. But go ahead, Rick.
So I want to say two things about voter suppression and about gerrymandering. Okay. Gerrymandering has a meaningful effect in elections. It has a meaningful effect in both axes of politics. There are states where Democrats use the gerrymandering method to their absolute maximum advantage. Look at Maryland someday if you want to see a state that's gerrymandered on a Democratic side. Republicans do the same thing. In a lot of states, gerrymandering is so written into the code, the DNA of the system, where very frequently you will end up with states that where the Democrats try to protect long-term members or try to protect African-American seats or try to protect Hispanic seats at the expense of winning more seats. Gerrymandering is a meaningful impact. However, it still plays at the margins when we're talking about the majorities at stake. There are still 40 or so swing seats in the country on the House side, and there are still a lot of swing states on the Senate side. So put the gerrymandering in the back row for a second. Don't give up because you think that the deck is completely stacked against you. Some places it is. I'll tell you where it was. But in most places, it's a marginal effect. Mm-hmm. Voter suppression can be overcome by voter turnout. Okay? Voter suppression is a bad thing, and Republicans are trying to institutionalize and legalize it, but it can be overcome by turnout. Here's the trick to my Democratic friends, okay? Don't try to win. Try to fucking destroy them. Try to roll up the numbers so high it doesn't matter if they cheat. That's the secret you've got to think of 22 as. You've got to think about winning such a massive overhang in all these races that it doesn't matter if they cheat, because they're going to cheat.
Yeah.
But
you know what, Rick? That undermines the old political axiom that all you need is 50 plus 1, right?
Yeah,
that used to be for years when we were in campaigns as consultants or whatever. It was always all you need is 50 plus 1. That shit is out the window now because they will. If it's close, we saw what happened when it was close, guys, and that 50 plus 1 is out the window.
Do not go into it to try to scoot the ball over the goal line one time. Go into it to crush them so badly they leave the field holding their heads in shame. Yep. You've got to go and swing for the fences when you play this game. You've got to
It's
go
true.
out and go for big wins, big turnout moments, big motivation moments. You know, sometimes when we're playing at the electoral college level, you can do what we do, which is play the hyper-targeted game of small numbers. But that's what we do for a living. You can't scale that out to every single House race. You've got to go out and do voter turnout to overcome the voter suppression. Don't bitch about it. Don't complain about it. Just get out there, motivate your people, go out there, get the door knocking done, get the calls done, get the emails done. Do the things you have to do. There are mechanical processes that can overcome voter suppression. You got to do the hard work.
Because none of this matters unless you get asses to the polls or to fill out the ballots and send them in. That's the end game. Nothing
100%.
else matters. All right. So on that note, we're going to ask our audience for some help because we don't want these people to continue to succeed. We want them to pay a price. And we want to continue to spotlight the absurdity of some of these jackasses like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene. If you guys watch us on a regular basis, you know that we've been talking about this freak show that they've been on the road, this tour that they're doing, going around and this Make America First tour, where the hell they're calling it. So what we're doing is we are asking our audience to come up with names for this freak show road show that they're doing. Yes, I think we have some sound. Do we have some sound of that?
I've never talked to a veteran that said he signed up to serve our country so that America could become a socialist nation. But we're not the party of violence. You see, we're not the Democrat Party that supported and funded Antifa BLM riots all over the country. We're not the party that tore down monuments all year long. You see, we're the people that loves our history. We love our Constitution. We love our freedoms. This is what the American people want, because it's people over politicians. And the only way we're going to do that is with America First.
Good Lord, God help us. So LPTV fans, we want you to help us name this terrifying tour. So tweet us your ideas at #AskTheBreakdown. Rick and I have our own names, but we're not going to reveal them now. We will reveal them on Thursday. But tweet us your ideas, tune back in Thursday, and we'll reveal some of our favorites on Thursday's show. God,
y'all will often hear me reference my departed but beloved grandmother. And Dottie had a whole catalog of fascinating phrases and could tear somebody down with like, oh, that's an interesting outfit. You know, but she would have looked at Marjorie Taylor Greene and the words would have come hot and heavy. That woman would have torn Marjorie Taylor Greene's hide off and tacked it up on the barn. Woo!
Yeah, my grandmother, Gloria Setmayer, was similarly vicious when you got her going.
Oh, yeah.
But she did it in a Jersey way. In a Jersey way. You never wanted to be on the receiving end of that.
They're sort of perfect together. And if you were to take their DNA and make a clone, it would be the apotheosis of MAGA dictum. But it's just you guys are gonna have to brand this for them. We're asking our audience to brand the Gaetz and Greene tour, and we need you to get on it.
Yes, we know that you will not disappoint because we have a really smart audience. So,
we do.
All right, folks. Next up, after the break, we're going to remember the Tulsa massacre 100 years later. We'll be right back.
Before Donald Trump comes to Tulsa, remember what real leaders sound like.
Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice.
Too often we honor swagger and bluster and the wielders of force. Too often we excuse those who are willing to build their own lives on the shattered dreams of other human beings.
Now those who divide speak.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
I agree that looters ought to be shot, yes.
On sight?
On sight. The Negro and white citizen of this state are against the breakdown of law and order.
You have to dominate the streets. Please don't be too nice. Very fine people on both sides.
When you hear leaders speak, you know who they are, who they represent, and what kind of America they'll create. The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Welcome back to The Breakdown. So today marks the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre, where over 300 Black residents were killed by weaponized white mobs in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Rick, I would call this an act of domestic terrorism, what happened in Tulsa. And this was something that people, I think, largely were unaware of, including myself, until about a year and a half ago when the HBO program The Watchmen came out. I had no idea about this, and I'm actually embarrassed to admit it, but I wasn't alone. And I'm glad to see that so many people are now taking an interest in what happened there, because it was known as Black Wall Street. It was one of the most successful, thriving Black areas in the United States at that time. And these mobs burned down hundreds of Black-owned businesses, over 30 blocks in the Greenwood district of Tulsa. And that incident of racial violence is just so unspeakable. Over the weekend, there were several documentaries about this. There was PBS, History Channel, CNN. I encourage people to please go and watch one of those documentaries, or all of them if you have an interest in it. What unfolded there was just an act of pure racial violence that mars our American history, that we really do not want to forget what happened there. And Tulsa is still suffering to this day. It's been 100 years, and that environment still, that community still has never been made whole. And I'm not big on reparations, for slavery, and that's another argument. However, something needs to be done to make right what was taken from Black families and generations of them in Tulsa in 1921. There are still some living survivors. Did you know this, Rick? There's still a couple. They're like 107.
I did not know that until this weekend.
Yeah, 107, 106.
They're ancient survivors of this moment. And I think it's one of the important things to think about is, Steve Schmidt asked this question a lot. Can a nation live if it doesn't have a memory? Can a nation survive without a memory? And this is one of those things where it's not that we had didn't have a memory of it. We had erased it from our culture, from our memories. Look, I'm
literally
well versed in American history, like way above the average dog. And I knew there had been such a thing, but I never learned the details. Honest answer.
Right.
And it's important to look at this. It's important to look at this, and it's important to look at what happens when mob violence, particularly racially motivated mob violence, is given free rein.
That's right.
This is where all mobs end up, where all vicious, authoritarian and racially motivated mobs end up. And, the cost is incalculable.
Yes, and let's be clear. This was an act of racial violence that was domestic terrorism.
At scale,
they tried to,
for sure.
That's right. For years, they tried to whitewash what happened there. Even the local newspapers wouldn't use the term that it was a massacre. They called it a race riot, as if that the onus was on the Black folks in Tulsa. No, that's not the case. And for decades, which is an interesting part about this, the Tulsa history, that even in Tulsa, in Oklahoma, they did not talk about it in history books. It wasn't until it was the oral history of the survivors of this. And I think that the number is actually way larger than 300 people. That's kind of the official number. But in one of the documentaries they were digging up the mass graves because so many of the people were just thrown into mass graves. They didn't even have proper burials. They built a freeway through the community, which is another part of the discussions. We were talking about this earlier today, the discussions about kind of the environmental racism in infrastructure that goes on in this country. It's not only in Tulsa, it's happened in many cities across the country, from Los Angeles and Detroit and other places, where they built freeways through these communities to kind of almost like paper over what happened there. But that's a different discussion. But they literally did not talk about this or teach it in schools in Oklahoma until the 1990s, when they finally, someone got a news organization to acknowledge the massacre. And then that took off. They created a commission to look back on it. And but anyway, so we wanted to make sure that we recognized that, and we were part of being good stewards of history and educating our audience and encouraging people to learn more about what actually happened there. And Tulsa is still in need of our help. And our call to action for tonight is to donate to the Restore Black Wall Street 2021 campaign. The Greenwood Chamber of Commerce, and I'm so glad this is happening, they're looking to educate the public and preserve the last remaining buildings of the historic Black Wall Street area. There are still buildings that survived that and that are still in desperate need of restoration. And that's Restore Black Wall Street 2021.com if you're interested in that. And there's also efforts to help with community investment and rebuilding financial investment in that community, because what used to be a thriving 30 blocks of Black-owned businesses, to this day, there's only a half a block of Black-owned businesses. It's a shame. And we want to make sure that we try to do good to turn that around to the people of Tulsa. All right, folks, it's been a great show. Make sure you subscribe and listen to the Lincoln Project podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tune into our sister show tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern, where Speaking is back. And we will see you all again on Thursday at 8 p.m. and we will reveal our Gates and Green tour names. We'll see you Thursday.
Thanks, everybody.
They're coming in already. We love it.